Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today in this module we are going to talk about hydroelectric projects and large dams. This module will discuss why it is pertinent to talk about the environmental impacts of hydropower projects and large dams. Since independence, India has already commissioned more than 3,300 large dams, and in late 1990s, even as World Commission on Dams put the paradigm of development that heavily relied on large dams under critical evaluation, India continues to walk on the path of development through envisioning large dams as temples of modern India. The energy of flowing water has been harnessed by humans for the purpose such as grinding flour since 7th century in Indian subcontinent. In his article Gharats of Uttaranchal, Harnessing Natural Energy, Manikant Shah talks about three kinds of water mills. The first hydropower plant in the world was commissioned in 1878. The biggest hydropower projects today are Three Gorges Dam in China, which has 22,500 megawatt installed capacity, and Itaipu Dam in Brazil, Paraguay, with 14,000 megawatt installed capacity. More than 150 countries generated electricity through hydropower dams, and hydroelectricity accounted for 11% of electricity generation, and compared to 508 megawatt installed capacity at the time of independence, the contribution of hydropower in terms of installed capacity has gone up in India up to 43 times, with 21,700 megawatt installed capacity in the year 1996-97. During the late 1990s, Indian government launched a very ambitious program to add 50,000 megawatt more installed capacity in terms of hydropower projects. While Jawaharlal Nehru's speech on large dams as temples of India is oft quoted, it would be worth reproducing the exact words in order to grasp the import of Nehru's thoughts. I quote, "What is now complete is only half the work. We may celebrate the completion, but we must remember that the most difficult part still remains to be done, the construction of the dam, which you have heard so much. Our engineers tell us that probably nowhere else in the world is there a dam as high as this. The work bristles with difficulties and complications. As I walked round the site, I thought that these days the biggest temple and mosques and gurudwara is the place where man works for the good of mankind. Which place can be greater than this? This Bhakra Nangal, where thousands and lakhs of men have worked, have shed their blood and sweat and laid down their lives as well. Where can be greater and holier place than this, which we can regard as higher?" Unquote. 4 years later, Nehru, while speaking at 29th annual meeting of Central Board of Irrigation and Power, voiced his thoughts that suggest his commitment for environment. We reproduce below words that represent the developmental thinking and philosophy that Nehru had exactly below. I quote, "For some time past, however, I have beginning to think that we are suffering from what we may call disease of gigantism. We want to show that we can build big dams and we can do big things. This is dangerous outlook developing in India. The idea of having a big undertakings and doing big tasks for the sake of showing that we can do big things is not a good outlook at all. We have to realize that we can also meet our problems much more rapidly and efficiently by taking up a large number of small schemes, which is much less and where results are obtained very rapidly. Further, in those small schemes, you can get a good deal of what is called public cooperation, and therefore there is that social value in associating people with small schemes." Unquote. It is also important to add that Nehru's voices in the meetings was also marked by his formal announcement that he wished water and power engineers to start paying serious attention to the scope of smaller schemes, as he clearly voiced his disagreement with the then president of CBIP, and I quote, "You, the then president of CBIP, have just said now in your address that the cost of production in a small project is great. I am not at all sure if that is so, because the cost of a small project has to be judged after taking into account all the social upsets connected with the enormous concentration of national energy, all the national upsets of people moving out and their rehabilitation and many other things associated with a big project. Also, it takes a long time to build a project. The small projects, however, does not bring about these upsets, nor does it involve such a large endeavor." Unquote. During colonial period in India, an idea gained currency amongst development planners was trying to seek solution for multiple problems in what came to be known as multipurpose river valley development projects that sought to offer large dams as providing perennial irrigation, hydropower, drinking water, and flood control. Did affected people losing the land mount protest and resistance movements against these projects then? Rajendra Vora, in his book The World's First Anti-Dam Movement, the Mulshi Satyagraha, 1920 to 1924, narrates the story of struggle by affected persons led by Senapati Bapat to prevent the submergence of the Mulshi Valley. Guha in 2008 refers to how, I quote, as a boy growing up in Pune in the 1940s, Madhav Gadgil had known of Senapati Bapat, and later in 1960 he came across a book written by Bapat's associate V.M. Buskute, and still later in 1990s he came to read a historical study written in Marathi by Rajendra Vora, unquote. The struggle to oppose the dam being built by Tata Power Company with the support of the British government for irrigation as well as hydroelectric power project under the leadership of Pandurang Mahadev Senapati Bapat coincided with non-cooperation phase of larger anti-colonial struggle. Vora analyzes the arguments of the proponents and the opponents to the dam. The movement arose during those years of non-cooperation movement. Malekar, in his article in 2008, recollects that, I quote, the saga of displacement began when in 1991, when an ambitious plan to dam the confluence of Nila and Mula rivers at Mulshipeta began. In June 1919, the farmers of Mulshipeta near Pune were served land acquisition notices. Some 10,000 peasants had to move out and farmers had to give up land that would be submerged, unquote. Rothermund recounts that when Gandhi visited Pune in 1920, the Mavalas met him and asked for his advice in their struggle against the large dam. Gandhi asked them not to petition the government but to lie on the land which was being dug up and offer satyagraha, unquote. Acting on Gandhi's advice, the Mavalas launched satyagraha on April 16, 1921 under the leadership of Bapat. At the Maharashtra Provincial Congress Committee sessions in May 1921, under the chairmanship of Dr. Munje, a resolution was passed supporting the Mulshi Satyagraha. Malekar, in his article in 2008, recollects that on June 22, 1921, Bapat and his associates removed the rails being laid by the company as part of the project. They were arrested and held guilty by the court, and on October 19, 1921, were sentenced to 6 months simple imprisonment. Sangwai, in his book in 2002, says that peasant leaders of Mawal areas continued their opposition to the dam with novel methods. In 1924, Bapat declared Atmasamarpan, that is, sacrificing the self, to oppose the dam. Despite the profoundly ambivalent attitude of Gandhi towards the continued opposition of the dam, the struggle carved out a self-imagination as that of defending the subsistence economy and opposing the efforts of government to justify the profit motives of a private company in the name of public purpose. We learn from Rajendra Vora's account of Mulshi Satyagraha that large dams had not gone uncontested and the human impacts of large dams had come under criticism right from the 1920s. Gadgil and Guha, in their book Ecology and Equity, brings to us an account of strong protests by peasants of Sambalpur district who were to be ousted by Hirakud Dam in Orissa when the foundation stone was laid in March 1946. They also suggested that River Valley projects of 1950s met with little opposition, even when each of these projects, the Bhakra Nangal Dam in Punjab, the Tungbhadra project in Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka border, and the Rihan Dam in Uttar Pradesh, displaced tens of thousands of people. 1950s was a decade when both the superpower nation state believed in competing with each other in terms of building large dams and altering the context and course of the rivers. If in United States we witnessed Tennessee Valley Authority as an exercise that marked development planning, in Soviet Union it was the Leningrad power station that received accolades, following Stalin's concept of transformation of nature into machine for the communist state. In some ways, independent India was walking that script when it started to work on Damodar Valley projects. In 1970s, however, social and environmental impacts of large dams had come under questions and criticisms. In 1973, Kenneth E. Boulding penned a poem titled A Ballad of Ecological Awareness that captures the environmental impacts caused by destruction of large dams and raises relevant questions on behalf of affected communities. Here is the poem. The cost of building dam is always underestimated. There is erosion of the delta that the river has created. There is fertile soil below the dam that's likely to be looted, and the tangled mat of forest that has got to be uprooted. There is the breaking up of cultures with old haunts and habits loss. There is the education program that just doesn't come across, and the wasted fruits of progress are seldom much enjoyed by expelled subsistence farmers who are urban unemployed. There is disappointing yield of fish beyond the first explosion. There is silting up and drawing down and watershed erosion. Above the dams, the waters lost by sheer evaporation. Below, the river's cows and suffers dangerous alteration. For engineers, however good, are likely to be guilty of quietly forgetting that a river can be silty, while the irrigation people too are frequently forgetting that water poured upon land is likely to be wetting. Then the water in the lake and what the lake releases is crawling with infected snails and waterborne diseases. There is a hideous locust breeding ground when the water level is low, and a million ecological facts we really do not know. There are benefits, of course, which may be countable but which have a tendency to fall into the pockets of the rich, while the costs are apt to fall upon the shoulders of the poor, so cost benefit analysis is nearly always sure to justify the building of a solid concrete fact, while the ecological truth is left behind in the abstract. Unquote. However, by 1980s, it was being acknowledged that a significant percentage of water development in the United States has been a sad mistake. Writing a foreword to Nicholas Hildyard and Edward Goldsmith's two-volume comprehensive social and ecological effects of large dams, Brent Blackwater wrote, I quote, America's Tennessee Valley Authority is often held up as a model of how to make the economy of a valley flourish. In fact, people from all over the world came to see what TVA has done. Unfortunately, the TVA story is really a myth. The Environmental Policy Institute's analysis of the costs and benefits experienced by TVA's water projects during the first 50 years showed that the flood control and navigation objectives have yet to pay for themselves by any reasonable standards of accounting. Furthermore, areas in southeastern United States which did not receive financial aid from TVA did as well as or better than the TVA region, even though they were as poor or poorer to begin with. Published in 1984, Social and Ecological Effects of Large Dams presented an indictment of Foley's in development planning that relied heavily on large dams. It had appeared at a time when the environmental movement had started to stir the consciousness. It also influenced creative writers from Global South who had started to articulate environmental consciousness by weaving in new fables and fairy tales. Here we reproduce a short passage from Vikram Seth's 1991 poem, The Elephant and the Tragopan, a fiery speech by the Tragopan to the Big Shot, in order to show how indictment of political economy of large dams got articulated. I quote, You say that town is short of water, yet at the wedding of your daughter, the whole municipal supply was poured on your lawns. Well, why? And why is it that Minister's Hill and Babu's Burrow drink their fill through every season, dry or wet, when all the common people get is water on alternate days? At least that's what my data says, and every figure has been checked. So Big Shot, wouldn't you expect? A radical redistribution would help provide a just solution. In 1996, Silence Rivers, the Ecology and Politics of Large Dams, authored by Patrick McCulley, got published by Zed Books in association with the International Rivers Network, Berkeley. The central theme of Silence Rivers was a further evaluation of massive adverse impact of large dams that were on ecology and society, and yet another attempt to outline with robust analysis of data that was available that benefits from large dams had been exaggerated and could often have been produced by other less destructive and more equitable means. In a revised version of Silence Rivers, McCulley states that, I quote, the great hope for the hydropower industry is that global warming will come to its rescue, that hydropower will be recognized as a climate-friendly technology and receive carbon credits as part of international emissions trading mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. But science is not doing the hydropower industry any favors here. Studies show that reservoirs in the tropical countries most likely to be at the technology receiving end of north-south emissions trading schemes can emit greenhouse gases at levels higher than even the fossil fuel fired power plants, unquote. As an effort to ensure the protection of healthy river ecosystem, McCulley urges society to move from dams to watershed thinking. He states that the key to protecting and restoring rivers lie in treating with care and respect their entire watershed. Thinking on the watershed level means seeing rivers as integral part of the complex and dynamic system of land and water and biota. Disrupting any part of the system will eventually affect all other parts. Looking after rivers thus means looking after water, soil, ecosystem, and the air. Watershed thinking means dropping the language and accompanying concepts of controlling and enslaving, wild, unruly, and vested rivers. One cannot control a watershed. It requires recognizing and respecting the complexity of the interactions between land, water, and atmosphere. It means adapting to this complexity rather than making counterproductive efforts to control and simplify it. It also means respecting diversity of different watersheds and the natural and human communities that live within them. Unquote. To sum up, let's recall the advice that Elephant gives to the big shot in Vikram Seth's poem The Elephant and the Tragopan, 1991. I quote, I do not see the reason why you do not use what lies to hand before you try to dam our land. Your pipes cry out for innovation. Your storage tanks corrode and leak. The valves are loose, the washers weak. I have seen the water gushing out from every reservoir and spout. Repair them, it will cost far less than driving us to homelessness. But that's just one of many things. Plant trees. Revive your wells and springs. Guide from your roofs the monsoon rain into great tanks to use again. Reduce your runoff and your waste rather than with unholy haste, destroying beauty which once gone the world will never look upon.
As we talked about how there are social and ecological impacts of large dams, let's also see why large dams still remain a mainstay in the development thinking. By 2015, the dam industry had choked more than half of Earth's major rivers with some 57,000 large dams. The consequences of this massive engineering program have been devastating. The world's large dams have wiped out species, flooded huge areas of wetlands, forests and farmlands, and displaced tens of millions of people. The one-size-fits-all approach to meeting the world's water and energy needs is also outdated. Better solutions exist. While not every dam creates huge problems, cumulatively, the world's large dams have replumbed rivers in a massive experiment that has left the planet's freshwaters in far worse shape than any other major ecosystem type, including tropical rainforests. In response, dam-affected communities in many parts of the world are working to resolve the legacies of poorly planned dams. Elsewhere, and especially in North America, communities are starting to take down dams that have outlived their usefulness as part of a broader river restoration movement. Let's watch a video that also tells us that why this belief that hydropower is green and clean power is wrong, and what shall we know about the hydropower that is not as clean as we often are made to believe. Thanks.